Welcome back to FOGMAN Stories. I'm so glad to have you here again in our True Ghost Stories series, where we explore some of the eeriest and most mysterious paranormal encounters ever recorded. Tonight, we journey into the deep, dark woods, where an abandoned village holds a terrifying secret. Get ready, dim the lights. Make sure you're not alone, because this story will blur the line between reality and the unknown. But before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe to FOGMAN Stories so you never miss out on our latest ghostly tales. And now, let's get started. Story 1. This story was told to me, and now, in a way, I pass it on to you. My older brother and sister were the ones who first shared it. And when I asked each of them separately, they told me the exact same details. As far as I know, they have never gone back to verify what happened that day. But I still believe them. And now, I leave it to you to decide. Many years ago, when my siblings were still children, they would sometimes wander into the dense forest near our home. This all happened before I was born, since they were much older than me. I don't know how often they truly played in those woods, but I do know that at least once, they were forced to go in, and that day changed everything. Our father, who was neither particularly responsible nor very cautious, had agreed to look after a friend's cat. Unfortunately, during its stay, the cat managed to escape. Not wanting to admit his mistake, our father decided to send out a search party, which, in this case, meant my brother and sister. Their mission: to find the missing cat. Their destination: the forest. Though reluctant, they followed our father's instructions and set off into the woods, calling for the cat and searching every bush and tree stump. The deeper they went, the thicker and darker the trees became. Time was running out, the sun was beginning to set, and they had found no trace of the cat. Then, something strange happened. As they wandered through the endless trees, they stepped between two particularly large, ancient-looking trunks, and suddenly, before them, lay something they had never seen before. A village, or what remained of it. Crumbling walls, burnt wooden frames, and collapsed roofs littered the clearing. It looked as if the entire village had been consumed by fire long ago. But something about it felt wrong. The air was heavy. The silence was unnatural. As they explored further, they noticed odd details. Windows with no glass but with something shifting inside. Doors slightly ajar yet leading to nowhere. And the eerie sensation of being watched. The wind carried whispers, unintelligible yet persistent, as if the village itself was trying to communicate. Feeling uneasy, they decided to leave, but no matter which direction they walked, they always ended up back in the center of the village ruins. It was as if something was keeping them there, pulling them back again and again. Then they remembered the trees. They frantically searched for the two large trees they had walked through upon entering. Time felt distorted, their footsteps echoing in their ears. The temperature seemed to drop, and shadows lengthened unnaturally as if stretching toward them. And then, at last, they saw the trees. Taking deep breaths, they stepped through the trunks, and just like that, they found themselves back on the familiar path home. As they hurried home, a strange feeling lingered. My sister swore she saw figures standing in the village as they left, silent. Still, just watching. My brother insisted he heard footsteps following them, though whenever they turned, nothing was there. When they finally made it back, the sky had turned pitch black. And the cat? It had never even left the house. It had been hiding under a bed the entire time. But the village they discovered? It was real. They had seen it, felt it, walked through it, and yet, it wasn't supposed to be there. The next morning, curiosity got the best of them. They attempted to retrace their steps, following the same route into the woods. But no matter how far they searched, they never found the village again. The two ancient trees still stood, but stepping between them led to nothing but more trees, no ruins. No whispers, nothing. Was it a place lost in time? A forgotten memory trapped between worlds? No one will ever truly know. What do you think? Have you ever heard of anything like this before? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and remember, some places are best left undiscovered. Thank you for watching FOGMAN Stories. If you enjoyed this tale, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a chilling story. Until next time, stay safe, and stay curious. Story 2. The Whisper Beyond the Window. Have you ever felt a presence watching you in the dead of night? Not in a menacing way, but rather a silent guardian observing from the other side of existence? Some stories are not about fear, but about longing, about the thin veil between our world and the one beyond, where the echoes of love refuse to fade. This story is one such tale, a true experience passed down through generations, an account of a lingering soul that would not let go. This story is not my own, but it has been told to me so vividly that I feel as though I have lived it myself. It is the story of my grandfather, Matteo, and his experience with the ghost of his own father. Back when he was a young man, my grandfather and my grandmother lived in the quiet town of San Esteban, nestled in the heart of Mexico. It was a place of warm sunlit days and crisp, silent nights, where time seemed to slow, and the past clung to the present like a gentle shadow. Matteo was particularly close to his father, Alfonso. They shared an unbreakable bond, spending their days working the land together, talking under the old mesquite trees, and sitting on the porch, watching the golden sunset fade into the night. Alfonso was more than just a father, he was a hero in Matteo's eyes. Then, one fateful year, Alfonso passed away. It was an unexpected loss, one that shattered Matteo. He had always known death was inevitable, but knowing did not ease the pain. Alfonso's absence left a void in his life, an emptiness that no words could fill. Years passed. Matteo grew older, carrying the weight of his grief like a stone in his heart. He had moved on in life, at least on the surface, but deep down, he still longed for one more moment with his father. Then, one night, everything changed. Matteo had developed the habit of taking a small dose of medicine before bed. It helped him sleep, though he often lay awake, lost in thought. That evening, he took his medicine, lay down, and closed his eyes, expecting another restless night, but something made him open them again. Through the sheer curtains of his bedroom window, he saw movement, a shadow, a face. It was Alfonso, his father's face, just as he had remembered it, peered in through the window, bathed in the soft glow of the moonlight. His eyes were kind, his lips curved into the faintest of smiles. Matteo froze, his breath caught in his throat. He could not move, could not speak. He could only stare at the impossible sight before him. Then, Alfonso's lips parted. He was saying something, but no sound reached Matteo's ears. He was speaking, but the words were lost to the wind, carried away before they could be understood. And then, as suddenly as he had appeared, Alfonso was gone. Mateo lay awake the rest of the night, trying to make sense of what he had seen. Was it a dream, a trick of the light? Or had his father truly been there, watching over him, trying to tell him something important? Days passed, and Mateo told no one of the encounter. But then, it happened again. A few weeks later, as he lay in bed, he felt the same inexplicable pull to open his eyes. And there he was, Alfonso, standing just beyond the window. Silent yet undeniably present. Again, his lips moved without sound. And again, Mateo watched helplessly as his father faded away into the night. This time, Mateo spoke of the experience. He told his wife, his siblings, even a priest, but no one could offer a satisfying explanation. Some believed it was a dream, a manifestation of his grief. Others whispered about spirits who lingered, bound by unfinished business. But Mateo was convinced of one thing: his father was trying to reach him. Over the years, Mateo never saw Alfonso again. But the experience left an indelible mark on him. Every time he returned to San Esteban, he made it a point to sleep in the same room, in the same bed, looking out through the same window, hoping, just hoping, to see his father once more. Years later, when I visited that very house, I was given the same room. I knew the story well, and though I was skeptical, I found myself drawn to that window. The night was quiet, the air thick with the weight of history. I lay awake, staring outside, half expecting to see a familiar face looking back at me. I saw nothing, and yet, I felt something. A presence, a warmth, a quiet comfort that I could not explain. It was as if someone was there, not to scare, but to watch over me, to make sure I was safe. Was it Alfonso, or was it my mind playing tricks on me? I do not know. On the second night of my stay, something strange happened. As I lay in bed, a sudden chill swept through the room, and a faint whisper, barely audible, seemed to brush against my ear. I sat up instantly, my heart pounding. It wasn't a voice I recognized, yet it felt familiar, as if someone I had known long ago was trying to speak. Just like Alfonso had tried with Mateo. I listened carefully, but the whisper was gone. The silence of the night returned, heavy and undisturbed. I hesitated before glancing toward the window. Was I imagining things? Or had I just experienced the same inexplicable encounter that my grandfather once had? For the rest of my visit, I could not shake the feeling that I was not alone. The nights were filled with an eerie stillness. Yet I never felt threatened, only watched over. What I do know is that some love never fades. It lingers, reaching across the divide between life and death, whispering in the silence, waiting beyond the window. Some spirits haunt out of anger, some out of revenge, and some, like Alfonso, out of love. Perhaps the afterlife is not as distant as we believe. Perhaps those we have lost never truly leave us. They remain, unseen but ever present, watching, protecting, waiting for the day when we, too, will join them on the other side. What do you think? Have you ever felt the presence of a loved one, long after they have passed? If so, perhaps you already know, some goodbyes are never truly final. Story 3. There are places in this world where time seems to stand still. Where the past lingers like an uninvited guest. Some houses whisper stories of those who once lived within their walls. While others, they do more than whisper. They breathe, they watch, and sometimes, they make their presence known. Tonight, I will share with you a story that has haunted my family for years. A tale passed down from my mother, who experienced it firsthand. It's a story about the old blue house we once lived in. A place where eerie occurrences were not just occasional but an everyday reality. This is not fiction, nor is it exaggerated for effect. This is our truth. Now, let's step inside the blue house, if you dare. My mother was young when she and my father moved into the small, weathered house on the outskirts of a quiet town. The house was an old wooden structure, its faded blue paint peeling in places, revealing the bare wood beneath. It had been standing for decades, perhaps longer, and it had seen many families come and go. My mother didn't know much about its history at the time, but she soon learned that some houses come with more than just memories. They come with their own lingering inhabitants. At the time, my sisters had not yet been born, and my older brother wasn't in the picture yet either. It was just my parents and me, though I was far too young to remember any of what happened there. All I have are my mother's stories, vivid and chilling, each retold with the same weight of conviction every time. It all started with small things, odd, almost dismissible occurrences, doors that would creak open when there was no draft, whispers in the dead of night that my mother convinced herself were just the house settling. But as the days turned into weeks, these small disturbances grew into something much harder to ignore. One morning, my father had already left for work, and I was still sound asleep in my crib. My mother was lying in bed, enjoying the quiet moment of the early hours, when she heard the unmistakable sound of dishes clanking in the kitchen. The running water, the gentle clatter of plates being stacked, it was as if someone was washing the dishes. At first, she thought my father had returned, perhaps having forgotten something, but when she called out his name, there was no response. She got up and walked toward the kitchen, expecting to find someone there. But as she entered, she was met with an empty room. The sink was dry, the dishes still dirty from the night before. Nothing had moved, yet she had heard it, clear as day. She brushed it off, but the unease settled in her stomach like a weight that wouldn't lift. Another incident occurred one late afternoon when my mother was alone in the house. My aunt had come over for a visit. Knocking at the front door, my mother, who had been resting on the bed, tried to get up, but she couldn't. Something was holding her down. She struggled against the invisible force, but it was as if a heavy weight had wrapped itself around her, pinning her to the bed. Her heartbeat pounded in her chest as she strained to move, but the unseen force held firm. Then, as suddenly as it began, the weight lifted. She sat up, breathing heavily, and rushed to the door where my aunt stood, confused as to why my mother had taken so long to answer. When my mother told her what had just happened, my aunt's face paled. "That house is not empty," she whispered. "Something is here." As I grew older, around 2 years old, I developed what my mother called an imaginary friend. But this friend was different from the usual childhood fantasies. I would sit in the corner of the living room, laughing and talking animatedly to thin air, as if carrying on a conversation with someone unseen. My mother recalled one moment that sent chills down her spine. She had asked me who I was talking to, and I responded, quite matter-of-factly, "The man who stands in the hallway." There was no man. There never had been. But I insisted, pointing toward the dim hallway. where my mother suddenly felt a deep, unsettling chill. Of all the strange occurrences in the Blue House, none were more terrifying than the closet. During the day, it was just another closet, nothing remarkable. But at precisely 10 p.m. every night, something happened. The door would creak open on its own. At first, my mother thought it was just an old house quirk, perhaps the wood settling, or a draft from somewhere. But night after night, the closet door would swing open at the same time. And then, things started coming out. Not things that could be seen, but things that could be felt. My mother described the sensation as a presence, multiple presences, emerging from the dark. She would lie frozen in bed, gripping the blanket as an unnatural chill filled the room. Sometimes, she could hear the faint sound of breathing. Sometimes, she felt the bed shift as if someone had just sat down at the edge of it. One night, she woke up to find the blanket slowly being pulled away from her. She grabbed it tightly, yanking it back, but whatever was at the other end was stronger. She never saw it. She never wanted to. The longer my parents stayed, the worse it became. My father, though skeptical at first, began to notice odd things too. The way the floor creaked under the weight of unseen feet. The way lights flickered at the strangest times. But what finally drove them to leave was my mother's growing fear that whatever lurked in the house wasn't just content with staying unseen, it wanted more. So, one day, we left. My parents packed up our belongings and moved away, leaving the Blue House and its lingering spirits behind. They never spoke to the new owners, never checked back to see if the strange happenings continued. They simply turned their backs and never looked back. There are houses that hold memories, and then there are houses that refuse to let go of the past. My mother always believed that something was trapped in that house. Something that had been there long before we arrived and remained long after we left. I have no memory of living there, but I have her stories. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder, if I were to go back, would the Blue House remember me too? Story 4. There are many paranormal experiences I could share, but the one that haunts me the most happened a long time ago when I was just a child. I grew up next to a house with a tragic past, a place forever scarred by violence and death. The house's first owner was brutally murdered by an escaped convict. But the horror didn't stop there. His youngest son was beheaded, and the poor boy's head was never found. Some whispered that the murderer had thrown it into an abandoned quarry nearby. Years later, another family moved in, hoping to start fresh, but misfortune followed. The couple separated, and in a fit of despair, the wife jumped from the second-floor window with her infant in her arms. Both died instantly. Over time, the house earned a reputation as a cursed place. People avoided walking too close. And at night, some claimed to hear whispers, footsteps, and the cries of a baby coming from within. Even animals seemed to fear the place. Dogs would whimper and pull their owners away, while birds never nested near the old wooden beams of its decaying porch. One winter night, thick snow blanketed our small town, making travel impossible. My parents were unable to return home, leaving me and my older brother with no choice but to stay overnight at our neighbor's house, the very house with the dark history. Fear gripped both of us, but we had no alternative. At first, everything seemed normal. We sat in the living room with our neighbors, trying to focus on the flickering images on the television. The warmth of the fire crackling in the hearth was oddly comforting. But something about the house felt heavy. like the air itself was weighed down by unseen eyes watching from the shadows. Then it started. It began with an ordinary sound, the noise of dishes being washed in the kitchen. That wouldn't have been unusual, except that nobody was in the kitchen. Curious but unnerved, we checked the kitchen only to find it empty. The sink was dry, and there were no dishes in sight. The faucet handle was ice cold, untouched. Dismissing it as our imagination, we returned to the living room. Minutes later, a sharp crash echoed from the upstairs bathroom. The sound of shattering glass made us all jump. Our neighbor rushed to check, expecting to find a broken mirror or window. But when we entered the bathroom, everything was intact. There were no shards of glass, no sign of anything having fallen. Then the temperature dropped. It wasn't the normal winter chill creeping through the walls. This was different. A biting, unnatural cold slithered through the air, wrapping around us like unseen fingers. My breath came out in misty puffs, and goosebumps rose along my arms. Silence filled the house for a long while. I started to believe that the worst had passed, that the rest of the night would be quiet. I was wrong. I lay curled on the couch, exhaustion creeping over me. Just as my eyelids began to close, a noise in the corner of the room sent chills down my spine. The rocking chair, an old wooden thing, was moving on its own. Slowly, back and forth. Then came the sound. A baby's cry, faint, yet distinct, as if carried by the wind through invisible cracks in the walls. I shuddered, my heart hammering in my chest. I told myself it was just the wind, just my mind playing tricks. But then, footsteps, heavy, deliberate steps on the stairs leading to the second floor. And then, the voice, "Mommy?" A child's whisper, so soft yet so clear that it sent a wave of icy fear through me. I shot up, eyes darting to the staircase. My brother was still asleep on the couch beside me. My neighbors sat frozen, their faces pale, staring in the same direction as I was. Nothing. No one was there. Then, the door to the basement creaked open on its own. The hinges let out a slow, tortured groan. The darkness beyond seemed to stretch endlessly, as though the house itself had a mouth, yawning open to swallow us whole. I buried myself under the blanket, my entire body trembling, and refused to come out until the sun finally rose. The next morning, still shaken, I asked our neighbors how they could live in such a house. They simply shrugged and said they had grown used to it, that the strange happenings no longer bothered them. I could only stare at them in disbelief. There are houses that hold memories, some warm, some tragic. But then, there are houses that seem to breathe with the past, where the walls whisper and the floors remember every tragedy that occurred within. This was one of those places. I have never set foot inside that house again. But sometimes, even now, when winter arrives and the wind howls outside my window, I wonder, is the rocking chair still moving? Does the child's voice still call for a mother who will never come? Some houses are never truly empty. Story 5. Before we dive into this chilling experience, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the skeptics. Without them, these discussions wouldn't be nearly as engaging. But for those of us who have lived through the unexplainable, we know some things are real whether we believe in them or not. My story begins in the early 1980s. I was a young boy, barely old enough to understand the weight of loss, yet on the precipice of an experience that would forever change my understanding of life and death. My father had fallen seriously ill, and after weeks of trying to fight it at home, he was admitted to the hospital. I didn't want him to go, but deep down, I knew he had to. Before he left, I asked him a simple question. When you come back, can we go fishing together? He looked at me, his weary eyes filled with something I couldn't quite comprehend at the time. If I can come back, he said softly. Something about the way he said it made my stomach drop. Even though I was just a child, I felt as if he already knew he would never return. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. My father slipped into a coma, his body resting in a hospital bed while the rest of us tried to continue living, unsure of when or if we would ever hear his voice again. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a hot summer night, the kind that made the air feel thick and heavy. We didn't have air conditioning, so sleeping was always a struggle. I woke up drenched in sweat, needing to use the bathroom and get a drink of water. I shuffled through the dark, careful not to wake my brother, who was fast asleep in his bed across the room. After quenching my thirst, I returned to my bed, hoping to fall back asleep quickly. But the moment my head hit the pillow, I noticed something strange. A faint glow hovered above my brother's bed. At first, I thought it might be a trick of the light, a reflection from outside. Perhaps, but as I blinked and rubbed my eyes, the glow only intensified, taking on the distinct shape of a woman. She was draped in flowing white garments, her long hair cascading past her shoulders, glowing like freshly fallen snow. But the most terrifying thing about her wasn't her presence, it was the absence of her face. Where her features should have been, there was only a smooth, empty void. Panic surged through me. I wanted to scream, to leap from my bed and run as far as my legs could carry me. But before I could, the ghostly figure moved. She floated toward me, soundless and weightless. I felt paralyzed, my limbs refusing to obey my desperate need to flee. Then, before I could react, she placed a cold, ethereal hand over my mouth. Instantly, the air in the room changed. The stifling summer heat was replaced by an unnatural cold so sharp that I could see my breath in the air. My body trembled, not just from fear, but from the sheer unnatural chill that filled the space. She stood there, pressing her hand against my lips, staring down at me with an expressionless void. Minutes stretched into eternity as I lay there, too frightened to move. The silence was suffocating. The only thing I could hear was my own frantic heartbeat, hammering against my ribcage. In that moment, something flickered in my memory. A passage I had read somewhere about spirits. If you ask a spirit what it wants, it will leave. I couldn't speak, but I focused all my energy on forming the thought in my mind. What do you want? As soon as the question echoed in my mind, the woman shook her head. She lingered for just a moment longer, then began to fade, her form dissolving into streaks of white mist before vanishing entirely. The cold dissipated instantly. The oppressive heat of the summer night rushed back in, and I was left gasping for air, drenched in a mixture of sweat and fear. Without thinking, I bolted from my bed, racing into my mother's room. Between ragged breaths, I told her everything, my words tumbling over each other in desperation. She sighed and pulled me close, whispering words of comfort that did little to soothe me. It was just a bad dream, she said, stroking my hair. Go back to sleep. But I knew it wasn't a dream. The next morning, the phone rang, the kind of call you never want to receive. My father had passed away during the night. For days, I tried to rationalize what I had seen. Had it been my imagination? A fever dream brought on by stress and exhaustion? But deep down, I knew the truth. Years passed, and though life moved forward, that night remained etched in my mind. It wasn't until decades later, when I met a Native American spiritualist, that I finally received my answer. "That was your great-grandmother," he told me with certainty. "She came to prepare you, to make sure you were ready." I never met my great-grandmother in life, but in that moment, I understood she was there, watching, protecting, delivering the message that my father would never be coming home. Some things defy explanation, and some spirits, even in death, never truly leave us. I have told this story many times, and each time, I can still feel the cold, still see the faceless apparition standing over me. Some believe that spirits return for a reason, to warn us, to comfort us, to guide us through the unknown. Was she a messenger of death? A guardian ensuring that I wasn't alone in my grief? I may never know for sure. But I do know one thing: some encounters, no matter how fleeting, leave a mark on us forever. And sometimes, the dead have more to say than the living. Story 6. Selling real estate is always an adventure. Buyers and sellers bring their own fascinating stories. But sometimes, the houses themselves carry the most haunting tales. Back in April of 1989, I didn't believe in ghosts. There was no logical reason to. It simply wasn't rational. But unfortunately, this story is entirely true. That spring, I was handed a listing for an enormous 200-year-old Italianate-style mansion sitting on 6 acres of land. The house was undergoing renovation when the owner gave me a tour for the first time. We walked through the grand hallway, which split into 2 lavish sitting rooms. The left one was used as a family gathering space, while the right was a music room, boasting an elegant grand piano that had stood there for generations. Further in, we entered the formal dining room, then a modernized kitchen, and finally, a recently renovated bathroom. Having seen the first floor in its entirety, we climbed the grand staircase leading to the 3rd floor, where an observatory tower stood. This room, surrounded by large windows, overlooked the vast farmland and countryside. On our way down to the 2nd floor, I noticed that all 5 bedrooms were in various stages of renovation, except for one. The 6th bedroom was untouched, painted in a warm sunflower yellow with delicate white trim. It remained completely intact. The owner explained that they could not alter this room. Every time they tried to paint over it, the fresh coat would mysteriously fade overnight, revealing the original yellow underneath. The temperature inside this room remained a steady 70 degrees Fahrenheit, regardless of the season. The owner further elaborated that the room had belonged to the youngest son of a family in the late 1800s, a child who was now one of the lingering spirits of the house. When stepping inside, a presence could be felt, as if someone invisible was standing in the corner, watching. The sensation wasn't necessarily terrifying, but it was undeniably eerie. I wanted to step back out immediately, but, of course, I didn't believe in ghosts. Over time, various accounts surfaced from workers and previous owners. Several had claimed to see the apparition of a young boy, a man, and 2 other adult figures within the home. Renovation workers reported that tools often vanished, never to be found again. They heard footsteps and the dragging of heavy objects upstairs, even when no one was there. I dismissed these stories as superstition. I didn't believe in ghosts. One night, a construction worker stayed late to finish up in the kitchen. He reported hearing soft humming coming from the second floor. Thinking it was a radio left on, he went upstairs to check. The sound grew louder as he approached the yellow room. The moment he stepped inside, it stopped. He left the house in a hurry that night and refused to work late ever again. After finishing the tour, I thanked the owner. "Thank you for a fascinating afternoon. This will certainly be a unique listing." I was eager for the open house event. Scheduled 2 weeks later, the day of the open house was perfect, clear skies. A mild 60 degrees Fahrenheit. All the tools had been cleared away, and the house gleamed. Visitors entered through the kitchen, where homemade pastries, iced mint tea, and freshly brewed coffee awaited them. By the end of the event, as I saw off the last guest at the front door, a sudden chill swept over me. I turned back toward the kitchen, and as I passed the music room, I froze in place. A young woman sat at the grand piano. She wore a modest gray dress, her dark hair neatly pinned at the nape of her neck. Her deep, hollow eyes stared blankly at the piano keys. Yet she played no melody. Every hair on my body stood on end. A cold shiver crawled down my spine. Panicking, I rushed to the kitchen, where my colleague was cleaning up. "Who let a guest wander off alone in the house?" I demanded. "There's no one else inside," she replied casually. I stopped dead. Maybe the woman had entered from the front door and lost her way? I hurried back to the music room, but it was empty. I sprinted upstairs. Nothing. Only one place left. The observatory tower. Taking the stairs 2 at a time, I burst through the old wooden door, empty. She was gone. I was visibly shaking when I returned to the kitchen. The owner took one look at me and slid a steaming cup of coffee my way. My hands trembled as I took it. "You just met Eleanor Hayes," the owner said with an odd smile. "Who is Eleanor Hayes?" I managed to whisper. The owner then shared the tragic history of the house. Eleanor had lived in the mansion with her husband, his younger brother, and their 8-year-old son. She had fallen in love with her brother-in-law, and when her husband discovered the affair, the two men dueled in the upstairs hallway. Both were killed. A year later, Eleanor's son died of typhoid fever. Eleanor herself passed away at 30, rumored to have died from grief. And yet, she never left. She only appears to those she accepts as guests in her home. The owner continued, "She's never been malevolent. We consider her a part of the family. We even see her son from time to time. As for the two men, I think they're the ones responsible for the disappearing tools." I shuddered as the owner revealed one final detail. A psychic had once visited the house and sensed an object buried beneath the soil. He claimed that Eleanor's wedding ring remained hidden somewhere on the property. Curious, the owners had rented a metal detector and searched the grounds according to the psychic's instructions. Sure enough, they unearthed a ring, 2 feet beneath the earth, engraved with Eleanor's initials inside the band. The owner retrieved the ring from a drawer and placed it in my palm. I stopped breathing. Every hair on my arm stood straight. I inhaled deeply, steadying myself. It was just a ring. An old ring. There were no such things as ghosts. Yet, as I stepped toward the door, an icy chill wrapped around me. Slowly, I turned. Eleanor stood at the top of the staircase, smiling. The next day, I drove to the cemetery to verify the story. And just as the owner had said, the entire family was buried there. Then, I visited the historical archives. Everything checked out. I even found an old photograph of Eleanor Hayes. That was the moment I became a believer. Story 7. Growing up. We all have memories that seem to linger in the shadows of our minds. Moments that make us question what we truly saw, heard, or experienced. Some might be dismissed as childhood imagination, others as dreams that felt too real. But then there are those memories that refuse to fade, etched into the fabric of our reality, forcing us to accept the unknown. This is one of those stories. My name is Jonathan, and I am now 49 years old. But the event I am about to share happened when I was just 6. Back then, my family lived on Maple Street in a quiet town along the California coast. The house we stayed in had a rich history. It was once owned by a renowned artist who created some of the most beloved animated characters of his time. The house was an old Victorian-style home with creaky wooden floors and a wraparound porch. It had a strange energy to it, a presence that always made me feel like I wasn't truly alone. As a child, I would hear whispers in the walls, strange knocking sounds that seemed to follow me from room to room. My parents dismissed it as old house noises, but my siblings and I knew better. One evening, my older brother, my sister, and I were walking home from a small diner just a few blocks away. It was a different time back then, when children could roam the streets freely without much worry. The streets were lined with old oak trees, their branches swaying gently in the night breeze, casting eerie shadows on the pavement. The air was crisp, and the faint scent of the ocean carried through the wind. As we reached the front door, my brother realized he had forgotten the house key. Thinking quickly, he lifted me up and helped me squeeze through the slightly open kitchen window so I could unlock the front door from the inside. I landed softly on the kitchen floor and dusted off my hands. The house was dimly lit, the glow from the streetlights barely seeping through the curtains. Everything was quiet, too quiet. The only sound was the distant hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the clock hanging in the hallway. I took a step forward, heading toward the front door when I passed the staircase leading up to the second floor. Something made me stop, a strange feeling, like being watched. My heart began to pound as I slowly lifted my gaze. And there it was. At the very top of the narrow staircase stood a figure, something that should not exist. It was humanoid, but grotesquely exaggerated, as if it had stepped straight out of an animated nightmare. Its head swayed unnaturally from side to side, almost as if it were glitching, vibrating with an unsettling intensity. Its grin was wide, too wide, stretching across its face like a marionette forced into an eternal, twisted smile. Then it let out a laugh. Not a normal laugh, but an unnatural, high-pitched cackle that seemed to echo from everywhere and nowhere all at once. It was a sound that didn't belong in this world, something manufactured by forces beyond human understanding. I felt frozen, my breath caught in my throat. The air in the room suddenly felt heavier, pressing against my chest. Despite the sheer terror of the moment, I wasn't completely paralyzed. For some reason, I wasn't as afraid as I should have been. Perhaps it was my childhood curiosity. Or maybe, deep down, I had always known that this house held secrets that couldn't be explained. Snapping out of my trance, I bolted toward the front door, my feet barely touching the ground. My hands fumbled with the lock as I swung it open, letting my brother and sister rush inside. "There's something at the top of the stairs," I gasped, pointing towards the second floor. But they didn't seem surprised. Instead, They exchanged glances, their faces pale but unsurprised. It was then that they told me they had seen it too. Many times before, our family never openly spoke about what happened in that house. But the memories never left me. My siblings later told me that they had experienced other bizarre occurrences, objects moving on their own, doors slamming shut when no one was there, and even hearing their names whispered when they were alone. One night, my brother was lying in bed when he felt something press down on his chest. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. It was as if something unseen was holding him in place, suffocating him. When he finally regained control of his body, he ran to my parents' room, only to find them deep in sleep, unaware of what had just happened. My sister had a different experience. She swore that she once saw a shadow figure standing at the foot of her bed. Watching her, it had no distinct features, just an inky black mass that seemed to pulse and shift as if it were alive. Despite all of this, my parents refused to believe that anything was wrong with the house. "It's just your imagination," they would say, but deep down, I think they knew something was off. Years later, after we had moved away, I did some research on the house. I found out that the original owner, the artist, had spent his last days locked away in the attic, obsessively working on his final sketches. He had become convinced that his creations were alive, that they were speaking to him. When he died, some of his unfinished works were found scattered across the attic floor, bizarre, twisted versions of the characters he had once lovingly drawn. To this day, I wonder what it truly was. A ghost? A remnant of something sinister that had once called that house home? Or was it something else entirely? Something that defies all logic? I don't have the answers. But I do know one thing for certain. That night was real, and so was the thing at the top of the stairs. Story 8. There are things in this world that logic alone cannot explain. We hear stories, legends, and whispered rumors of those who refuse to leave, souls tethered to places they once called home. As someone who never fully believed in the supernatural, I never expected to become the subject of such a story myself. But what I experienced in that house was real. And no amount of skepticism can change that. I wasn't suffering from sleep paralysis. This wasn't a mere nightmare. This was something far beyond the realm of my understanding. I had recently moved in with my mother and her boyfriend into an old countryside farmhouse. It was the kind of house that carried the weight of time. Wooden beams creaked underfoot. The walls held a faint scent of dust and age. And at night, the wind howled through unseen cracks like a distant, mournful whisper. At first, everything seemed normal, but as the days passed, I started noticing strange occurrences. Every night, at exactly the same time, I would hear voices, deep, guttural murmurs that seemed to echo through the walls. The first time it happened, I thought perhaps the television had been left on. But after checking, I found nothing. The house was silent. I asked my mother and her boyfriend if they had heard anything. But they dismissed it. "It's probably just the wind." Her boyfriend chuckled. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. As the weeks passed, the disturbances grew worse. I began waking up in the middle of the night, unable to move. My body was frozen, paralyzed in place, while an overwhelming sense of dread suffocated me. It felt as if someone, was standing near me. Unseen but undeniably present. At first, I chalked it up to my imagination. But when the paralysis became a near nightly occurrence, I knew something was wrong. Desperate for relief, I began whispering prayers whenever I felt trapped. I wasn't particularly religious, but the moment I recited the Lord's Prayer, I could feel the weight lifting from my body. It worked, at least for a while. Then, the entity grew bolder. One night, as I lay in bed, I felt something press against my shoulder. A cold, skeletal hand. My breath hitched in my throat. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to run. But I couldn't move. I could only listen as a raspy voice whispered my name. Panic surged through me. I clenched my fists, struggling against the unseen force holding me down. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw her, an old woman. She had no body, no limbs, only a face. Hovering inches from mine, her skin was ashen, her eyes hollow pits of darkness, and her mouth twisted in a silent scream. The air around her rippled, heavy with sorrow and rage. And then, in a voice that chilled me to my core, she shrieked, "What am I supposed to do now?" The force of her voice was like a physical blow. My ears rang, my heart pounded, but amidst the terror, something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to let this entity control me anymore. With all the strength I could muster, I shouted back, "Leave, go into the light, now." The woman's expression shifted, from fury to shock. For a brief moment, she simply stared at me, as if trying to comprehend my words. And then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, she vanished. The room fell silent. From that night on, I never saw her again. Afterward, I tried to uncover the history of the house, searching for records of anyone who might have died there. But I found nothing, no deaths, no tragic stories, nothing that could explain who she was. But the story doesn't end there. Even after she disappeared, the house never felt quite right. Some nights, I would hear faint whispers again, nothing clear. Just hushed voices in the darkness. Other times, objects would be moved ever so slightly, like someone was still lingering in the space, unseen yet present. My mother admitted she had seen strange shadows moving across the walls. Shadows that didn't belong to anyone in the house. She also started waking up in the middle of the night, feeling as if something was watching her. My mother's boyfriend, a skeptic to the end, finally confessed that he had once heard soft crying coming from the empty guest room. We finally decided to bring in a priest to bless the house. He walked through each room, sprinkling holy water, reciting prayers, and pausing in certain areas as if he could sense something we couldn't. When he reached my bedroom, he frowned. He stayed there longer than anywhere else, whispering Latin phrases under his breath. When he finished, he turned to me and said, "There was a soul here, confused and lost, but I believe she has moved on." His words sent chills down my spine. I no longer see the old woman, but even now, I still wonder about her. Who was she? Why was she so lost? Had she been searching for something? Or had she simply been trapped in a place she once called home? Unable to move on? I sometimes regret the way I reacted that night. Maybe she wasn't trying to harm me. Maybe she was just desperate for help. Maybe she had been waiting all those years for someone to acknowledge her presence. But I will never truly know. Some might say ghosts are merely figments of our imagination, shadows of the subconscious mind. But I know better. She was real, and somewhere, in the darkness, she still lingers, waiting for someone to listen. Story 9. There are countless stories of the unknown, whispers in the dark. shadows at the edge of vision, strange sensations that prickle along the spine in the dead of night. Some call them hallucinations, tricks of the mind. Others swear by their reality. But no matter where you stand on the subject, one thing is certain. When you experience it for yourself, no amount of rationalization can make the fear any less real. I had always been skeptical of the supernatural. I believed in science, in logical explanations for things people feared. I had read about sleep paralysis before, understood the mechanics behind it, and dismissed it as nothing more than the brain playing tricks on itself. But what happened to me one night shattered that belief entirely. It started, as most nights did, with meditation before bed. I had always found it soothing, a ritual that helped me relax and slip into sleep more easily. That night was no different, at least. Not at first. At some point in the night, I woke up. Normally, this wouldn't have been unusual. I had a habit of waking up multiple times throughout the night. Usually out of thirst, I would simply reach for the bottle of water I always kept beside my bed, take a sip, and fall back asleep. It had become second nature to me. But this time was different. I wasn't thirsty. I wasn't even particularly aware of my body at first. It was only when I tried to turn over that I realized something was wrong. I couldn't move. A deep, overwhelming stillness settled over me. My limbs were frozen in place. My chest felt heavy, and no matter how much I willed it, my body refused to respond. A strange, electric sensation coursed through me, as if my entire being was brimming with an energy that had nowhere to go. My breathing was shallow, my heartbeat loud in my ears. Then, I felt it. Something touched my ankle. The sensation was distinct, a cold, deliberate pressure, like the tip of a finger tracing against my skin. It shouldn't have been possible. I couldn't feel any other part of my body. Yet that icy touch was unmistakable. It pressed, insistent, then withdrew. A pause. Then, another touch, this time firmer, as though testing me. Panic flared in my chest. But I fought it down. I knew what was happening. I had read about sleep paralysis before. I understood that it was a condition where the body remains in a sleep-like state while the mind wakes up, often leading to hallucinations. I reminded myself that this was normal, that my brain was likely fabricating the sensation. But logic was a weak defense against terror. The touch lingered for what felt like an eternity. Then, slowly, it began to move up my leg. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. My throat felt constricted, my body still locked in place. My mind was in full-blown panic mode now, rationality crumbling under the sheer weight of what I was experiencing. I could sense something in the room with me, something beyond my comprehension. Watching, waiting, and then, the whispers began. Low, unintelligible murmurs, just at the edge of perception. They wove through the silence, distant but unmistakable. My skin crawled. The air in the room felt thick, pressing down on me, suffocating. I was no longer just experiencing sleep paralysis. I was trapped in something much worse. A jolt of adrenaline shot through me. My mind screamed at my body to move, to fight, to escape. And then, with a burst of sheer willpower, I managed to wrench my arm free from the invisible grip holding me down. In that instant, the paralysis shattered. My body was mine again. The suffocating weight lifted as suddenly as it had appeared. I sat up, gasping for breath, my heart hammering in my chest. The room was silent, still. Nothing was out of place. But I knew what I had felt. I knew what I had heard. The experience had lasted only seconds, maybe 12 in total, but it had felt like an eternity. I had always thought I would be prepared if something like this ever happened to me. But nothing could have truly readied me for that feeling, that undeniable presence. That touch of something beyond explanation. That night, I lay awake for hours, unable to shake the memory. I knew I had encountered something, whether it was merely a trick of the mind or something else entirely. I couldn't say, but I knew one thing for certain: I never wanted to experience it again. Sleep paralysis is a terrifying experience, and for those who have encountered it, it can feel like the boundaries between reality and nightmare blur. Some say it's simply a neurological glitch, a momentary miscommunication between the brain and body. Others believe that in those vulnerable moments between sleep and wakefulness, we become susceptible to forces beyond our understanding. Whatever the truth may be, one thing remains certain: when it happens to you, it's an experience you'll never forget. Have you ever had an encounter with sleep paralysis? What do you believe it really is? Share your thoughts below. Story 10. There are stories that linger in the shadows of our minds. Stories that refuse to be forgotten. Some moments in life defy logic, challenge our understanding, and leave us with an unsettling feeling that reality may not be as straightforward as we believe. This is one of those stories, one that I never sought out but instead found me. It all began on an unremarkable evening. In the stillness of my bedroom, the air was thick with the scent of old books and the faint hum of the ceiling fan, lazily cutting through the silence. I had meant to stay up late to study, textbooks sprawled across my desk, my notes hastily scribbled, but sleep had claimed me before I could even finish a chapter. When I awoke, disoriented and groggy, the first thing I noticed was the dim glow of my bedside lamp, casting elongated shadows along the walls. The second thing, however, made my breath hitch in my throat. There, standing at the foot of my bed, was my grandmother. It took my mind a few moments to process what I was seeing. She stood just as I remembered, wrapped in a soft shawl, her frail frame slightly hunched. The kind eyes that had once watched over me filled with a quiet intensity. But my grandmother had passed away 2 weeks ago. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. Every fiber of my being screamed that this was impossible. And yet, there she was. I could feel the warmth of her presence, the familiarity of her existence. "Grandma?" My voice was hoarse, my throat dry. She tilted her head slightly, her lips curling into the same gentle smile she used to give me whenever I stumbled as a child. "Why are you here?" I whispered, my hands gripping the edge of my blanket. "I have something to tell you," she said, her voice carrying the same tenderness as always. But there was something else beneath it, an urgency that sent a shiver down my spine. "Tell me what?" I sat up straighter, my pulse hammering. She hesitated, her eyes darkening. "I can't say it outright. You must understand it on your own." A sinking feeling settled in my gut. 1,000 possibilities raced through my mind, but only one stood out, sharp and unrelenting. "Is someone going to die?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She nodded once. The room felt colder, the silence pressing down on me like a heavy weight. "Who?" My voice cracked. "Is it me?" She shook her head, her expression softening. "No, you have more time." A part of me exhaled in relief. But the dread didn't fade. "Mom?" My mind immediately jumped to the person I feared losing the most. Again, she shook her head, Not her. I swallowed hard. My thoughts raced through the people closest to me. Is it Grandpa? I asked, feeling my stomach twist. This time, she nodded. A sharp pang of sorrow shot through me. My grandfather was old, yes, but he had always seemed invincible to me. A steady force in our family. The thought of losing him so soon was unbearable. When I managed to ask, my voice barely audible, her response was as cryptic as before. New Year. The words echoed in my ears, their weight sinking deep into my chest. I wanted to ask more, to plead for details, for a way to prevent the inevitable, but before I could, she was gone. The room was still again, as if she had never been there at all. From that night on, I could feel her presence lingering in the house. Strange things began happening, things that defied logic. The lights flickered at odd times. The air felt colder in certain rooms. And, on more than one occasion, the bathroom door slammed shut on its own. At first, I dismissed it as paranoia, as my mind playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew the truth. She was still here, watching, waiting. One night, I heard soft whispers coming from the hallway. I tiptoed to the door, pressing my ear against the wood, heart pounding in my chest. The voice was faint, almost like a breeze carrying forgotten words. I could barely make out the syllables, but they sent shivers down my spine. Be ready. My nights became restless. Shadows moved where there should have been none. Objects shifted slightly when I turned my back. I felt the weight of unseen eyes watching, not with malice, but with a quiet sadness. As New Year's Day approached, the tension in my chest grew unbearable. I spent the last night of the year at my grandfather's house, staying close to him, not knowing what to expect but feeling an undeniable need to be there. The hours crawled by. Midnight neared. My grandfather sat in his old armchair, sipping tea, telling stories about his youth. His laughter was warm, his voice steady, and then, at exactly midnight, the clock chimed. The room fell into silence. My grandfather exhaled slowly, setting his cup down on the small wooden table beside him. He looked at me, his gaze unreadable, but a strange understanding flickered in his eyes. She came to see you, didn't she? He asked softly. My breath caught in my throat. How did you? He smiled, a sad, knowing smile. She visited me too. She's been waiting. Tears pricked my eyes. I wanted to beg him to stay, to fight whatever force was pulling him away. But deep down, I knew it was beyond my control. A moment later, he sighed and leaned back in his chair. His eyes closed, his breathing slowed, and just like that, he was gone. Even now, I struggled to make sense of it all. Had my grandmother truly returned to warn me? Had she been watching over him, waiting to guide him to the other side? Or was it simply my grief manifesting in ways I couldn't explain? Some might call it coincidence. Others might dismiss it as a dream. But I know what I saw. And I know she was real. Stories like these make us question the thin veil between life and death. Whether we believe in spirits or not, there are moments that shake us to our core. Moments that remind us that the ones we love never truly leave us. Perhaps my grandmother's visit was a warning. Or perhaps it was simply a way of preparing me for the inevitable. Either way, I am grateful, because in that fleeting moment, I got to see her one last time.